Hey, it's Mosquito, also known as Chris. Today we are going to take a look at making this box in probably a little bit different way than you're used to on my channel. So let's get to it. We're going to tackle something I don't talk a whole lot about on this channel. That's the CNC machine. So I know that I haven't used the CNC machine a whole lot on this channel in the past, and yes, I think it is a subgenre of woodworking. It's not the same skill set as if I'm doing it all by hand at the bench or running parts through the table saw or using the bandsaw, but using the bandsaw, table saw, not the same thing as using a panel saw. It's just another step in woodworking. That's all I'm going to say on that. If we have anything else to say, keep it civil, put it in the comments below. I'm kind of curious to see what other people say. Do you think CNC is actually a genre of woodworking, or is it something else? I will say it's different. I've used it for other hobbies. I haven't used it a ton on my woodworking side of things. I like doing hand tool joinery, so to me, a lot of the stuff that I ended up doing, I liked using the machines to get stuff ready and then going to the bench with hand tools and finishing things out from there. And that's just the way I enjoy to do things. It's a Shapeoko 3XL, so it's like 16 by 32 is what it can cut. Built an enclosure for it, and it's been here for a while. Let's get into this a little bit more. Okay, so I've already run a couple of parts on this, and essentially I have it set up to kind of be repeatable. So the CNC file, which we'll go through later, it's set up to do one side and one end. So there's obviously 4 pieces to this box. As far as the sides go, we'll do the lids a different way. But that's what I've got set up, and I have some stops. So this one and this one are loose, but these two are stops that I have set up so that I can just reposition a board and put it here, and it's always going to be in my set XY0. Almost always set the 0 for the Z height to the bed of this waste board here, so that way I know that I start at the stock thickness and I go until I hit my 0, so I'm not going to be cutting into the waste board as much, which I have definitely done in the past. Basically, I just kind of know where I need to line up. So I have a stop here, and that one, there's a line. I cut a grid into my waste board, and there's a line here, and I know that that line off of the front of this is where 0 is for the X. And then the Y is if I just butt it up against these two. So that's what I'm doing here. Yeah, I just made these hold down clamps, and I just use those to clamp these down. And like I said earlier, we'll get into the actual CNC file itself later. All right, I'm going to rapid position to my current XY. So we are good to go there. I've got my program loaded. We're going to start the job. It's telling me to load my next tool. So I'm going to hit continue, and then this is going to get a little bit noisy. All right, so there's a little bit of work here to do, and that is because I used tabs. So if you're not familiar with tabs, all these little spots that I didn't cut were on purpose, and that's to hold the sides to the pieces I'm cutting out so that they don't just shoot all over the place and get chewed up by the CNC. So you can also use tape, you can also use various other methods of holding things down, but for quickness, that's what I ended up going with, was just this and tabs, because it's pretty easy to clean up. But essentially what I'm going to do is just kind of break all these tabs through, and it shouldn't take too much effort. I'm not even looking really to cut them flush or anything. I'm just essentially splitting them along the grain to release this piece, and then we will clean up those tabs in a second. Also, your hand is definitely not a hammer, so don't use it like that. Okay, so it's not a perfect ready to go part. We got a little bit of hand tool work to go, so we're still good, right? We're still okay? So we're gonna put this in the bench, in the vise, and I've just got these 3 triangles, and I'm just gonna kind of knock them off with a chisel and then cut them flat. And in case you can't quite tell what I'm doing, I'm going to exaggerate it here, but I basically angle way up and I kind of lower it down and slowly take off small pieces of this, because I don't really want to come in all at once, because your chances of breaking something off and then breaking a chunk out are a lot higher that way. So I just do little tiny pieces until I get pretty close and then trim it flush. Also, sometimes the grain doesn't always work for you either, so not the end of the world. We're probably going to end up chamfering these edges anyway, or rounding them over or something. Next thing I'm going to do is I've got a piece of gray Scotch-Brite, and I was being pretty aggressive. I don't know if you could hear that in any of the video clips, but basically I was trying to push things as fast as I could without breaking stuff. So I was going a little rough, and part of that is these are all going to be hidden. So these are going to be the joints that hold the box together at the corners. Not too concerned about that, because I'm going to have more than enough surface area to glue. There's a little bit of tear out though, since I was, routing across end grain. Anybody that's used a router knows that that's going to be a thing. So there's a lot of things I could have done. I could have slowed it down. I could have sped it up. I could have taken a shallower cut, left stuff over. There's a lot of things I could do. But again, I was going for speed over anything else, just because I wanted to see basically how quickly I could make these. And I can optimize the Toolpaths a little bit more. But I did get these down to about 20 minutes per set, so about 40 minutes per box, which doesn't count the setup time and that kind of stuff, but that's not horrible, I guess. Kind of knock off any of those little fuzzies around the edges. It's just a pretty quick way of kind of taking care of a lot of those fuzzies. I've also seen people use like a nylon brush, if you have one of those, just to kind of knock off any of the fuzzies that may have stayed there. And then on the outside here, I just use a sanding block. And that usually pretty quickly takes care of the rest of it. All right, so there's our 2 pieces. We are going to get in a little bit tighter here, and we'll take a look at what we did. An initial concept where we kind of use these, I don't know what they call them, dog bone style ends. They were sort of tenons. And so you would cut those out like that. You just kind of cut through here and then cut the tenons so that you had that, these little indents. And that was because when you come in with a router bit, it's going to leave a little scallop. And so if you do that, then your tenons can go into a hole that's the same width, which is what we have, holes that are the same width. And then you could put those together. But the thing I didn't like about that was that, one, I mean, that's a very big end grain, so it doesn't look like you really did much. It looks like you just butt glued them together. But the other part of it was you're doing all your CNC work here, and then you got to cut a groove on the other side. I was using my Boxmaker's plow plane to cut those grooves because it was easy. Just set it up, slam the thing in with some holdfasts, and then go to town. I mean, it wasn't hard. It didn't take much time, but it is an extra step. Somebody else had sort of shared an idea that they were using some really thin tenons and a chamfer bit and something else. It was basically the same kind of a design. I just kind of iterated on it, and I came up with some larger tenons, or I guess I'm kind of calling it blind box joints, because that's sort of what it is. Basically, I've got these wider fingers, so those are all pocketed out, and then what's left, I do the same on the other side. And you can see here, there's little recesses on either side of both of these, and that's because when the bit comes in here, corner there, that's radius because you're using a 1/4 inch router bit. And so what I wanted to do was try to make one tool. So they were using 2 different tools from the looks of it. He was basically doing everything with a straight bit and then coming in with a chamfer bit, and he would chamfer the edges of both the tenons and here. And I didn't want to do that because, one, with 3/4 inch thick material, this is only an 1/8 inch right here. So I leave an 1/8 of an inch, and that leaves you with, what, 5/8 of an inch? And that's plenty of glue surface area for this particular style of joinery. So I just used the router bit to make some rabbets on both sides of both the fingers on here and then also the sockets over here. I just put in those relief measures so that way these could sit fully in there, even though these are going to be rounded at the very edges. And then same thing with the edges that are rounded on the insides of here can sit on either side of these fingers without having any issues. And so that's pretty much what I came up with. And I'm relatively happy with the design because it lets me accomplish the things I wanted to, which is all of it being cut on one side for the grooves and the joinery and everything. Only 1/8 of an inch, so it looks like a rabbet. But then everything hopefully slides together pretty nicely. And then what you'll end up doing is just coming in with a piece of plywood, and we're using that for the bottom. So obviously you'd have another side and another end, which I got to go cut out on the CNC still, but that kind of covers what I did here. Kind of fun. Okay, I just wanted to close the loop a little bit here before we dive into some of the other stuff, but essentially all I did was just throw a bunch of glue on everything, and then I used a little bit of shellac. These are actually going to end up being boxes that are going to get buried, and so they didn't want anything that was going to be, you know, environmentally harmful and stuff like that. So I just went with shellac because it's a natural finish and not too hard to do. So that was pretty simple. Just sanded it up, applied 2 coats, and then I do kind of like a light hit with some of that like yellow Scotch-Brite or the gold Scotch-Brite, just to kind of buff it to knock down on any of the shiny spots or whatever, and it gives it a nice smooth finish. But that's not really what that was about. The lid I didn't go into. It's pretty straightforward. It's essentially just a board cut to the 13-inch length and the 6-inch width, and then I put a 3/8 inch round over all the way around the top part of it. Then I used the laser to just burn in a little lily design. We were just kind of having some fun with some different ideas, and this was the one that my son picked out as his favorite, so that's the one I went with for this box. As far as attaching the lid to the box, these are going to a children's hospital for sort of like an event that they put on, and they need to be open. Then they're going to close them, and then they get buried. And so what we decided is that FastCap has these little like plastic domino things that have like barbs on them, and we're just going to use those. So we're just going to put some dominoes on the bottom side of the lid and then on the 2 ends, and then they'll be able to just push those together, and then it'll stay together. I might end up trying out just using standard wooden ones, just because plastic ground, I think I'd rather do just the wooden one. So that might be enough, just a friction fit to kind of push them in there. So we'll see. But anyway, nothing too fancy on that end of the box. So let's head inside and we will take a look at some of the actual software side of things for getting this thing created. Hey, welcome to the office. So this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to use Fusion 360. It's just kind of be a demonstration of how I use Fusion 360 to make this box specifically. If you're looking for more of a tutorial or how to get started, there's a lot of that out on the internet. If that's the kind of thing you're looking for, that's not this. I'm by no means an expert in Fusion 360. It's something that I've just sort of picked up and learned. So with that said, if you feel like there's things that I could do to optimize my process and you can be constructive, be nice or be gone, please feel free to put those in the comments. I'm always looking for ways that I can get better at doing this. Jump into Fusion 360 here and we will take a look at the model for this box. Sometimes I'll just be designing something to see how it looks, how the proportions look. If that's the case, then I don't always break things up quite the same way that I'm doing now. But this is the approach that I take if I'm going to manufacture something. So I'm going to send it to the CNC machine, design some parts in a way that I know I'm going to be able to machine them, and then sort of put them all together. So the first thing first is over here on the side, there is a little list of all your components, and I use components for pretty much everything. So just running through the components real quick, this is one side of the box, there's an end, that's the end of the box, And then I've got two different things. One is an assembly and one is a manufacturer component. Two components for box side and box end are kind of like the base components. Those are the ones that I'm actually designing on, and those are the ones that everything is linked to. To make sure that things are actually going to work correctly for what I want, what I do is I create an assembly, and inside that assembly, I just copy and paste a couple of different copies of the end and the side, or the parts that I'm trying to assemble. So then from there, I use the join. So there's a joint here, and you can kind of constrain some of these parts to each other. I'm not going to dive into that. The important thing is this lets me assemble the parts how they're actually going to be assembled to make sure that things actually fit. I like turning on hidden edges when it comes to joinery. So here you can start to see those dotted lines that are actually the joinery inside of these components, and we can start to see how they sort of mesh. These are the two things that I was talking about, where I have these two rabbits here. So there's a rabbit on this piece here, and then there's a rabbit up here. So this is what we've got. This is the end piece, and we can see with the wireframe here, there's this rabbit and that rabbit. So I don't have them modeled in, but if I were to cut this out on the CNC, this corner would actually be filleted because of the router bit that I'm using coming in here. So if I wanted to do that, we can go over here to my component, and we'll do that one and this one, and we'll do 0.125 radius to work with my 1/4 inch cutter. Okay, so if I turn that back off, go back into my assembly, we can see that I actually did the opposite corner that I intended. That's all right. So here you can kind of see, like, this is what the actual model is going to end up being when I cut it out. You're going to see this round here just because the router bit can't get into a perfectly square corner. And so if I turn my end back on, we can start to see in here, there's my fillet from that CNC router. And what it lets me see is that when I put that rabbit in, this is all open space, but it accommodates that fillet. So that just kind of shows me that that is going to be okay. So here we are again with the part for the end. And just like before, this part and this part, 0.125, is going to be rounded. There's going to be a fillet there. Again, same reason, because of that router bit. And so if I turn my box side back on, we can start to see again, because that rounded portion is there, those rabbits on the end of my side piece here are going to allow that to fit without having to have any interference on it or anything like that. So that's sort of how I use the assembly component. And then the last piece here. So here we've reset with the view, and I'm on my manufacturer component. And I've copied and pasted in a side and an end. If I were to make a change to the box side, it'll update in my manufacturer or my assembly component to reflect that. We can see that I've got them laid out here. I'm using a joint again here. So this is a joint, rigid joint here, because basically I just have it saying, okay, the center bottom of the end piece and the center bottom of the side piece are going to be joined together at that spot. And I have an offset of 1/2 inch. And that 1/2 inch is because I'm using a 1/4 inch router bit. It'll kind of cut down the middle between the two of those, and then it'll finish off by getting to the end of them. So basically your offset here is the same as your bit plus a little bit extra to make sure that you have offset. But essentially it's just clearance so that I can run a router bit between the two of them. What I have here is just laying them out. So end for end is going to be the way that I'm going to manufacture these. If I had skinnier parts, I might stack them. So I have, you know, one part up top, one part down on the bottom. But there's not a whole lot to this one. Like I said, it's just joining the two together. And if I go into manufacture now, essentially what I'm doing is I'm using my manufacturer model from this small toolbox. So this manufacturer model is what I'm using as my setup. I've got it set up for milling because that's what I'm doing, all that kind of stuff, the model. So I manually pick the model out from my models and then whatever I've created, so in this case manufacture. I like using fixed box when I'm doing stuff like this because it basically emulates how I'm going to do things, which is I'm going to cut a board to a specific length. It's going to be a specific width and it's going to be a specific thickness already, so I can already define that. So that's what this is. It's 20 inches long, 5.5 inches tall, 3/4 of an inch deep. Slotting operation, and what that does is basically just goes back and forth until it reaches the bottom of a slot. To try to stay in the same area, I do all of the operations except for cutout on the end before I move to do anything on the side. That's one of the limitations of the free versions of Fusion 360 is that you don't get rapids. You end up moving from one end of the part all the way to the other end of the part. It's only going to move as fast as your cutting operation is going. So like say you're going 120 inches per minute for your cut, that's all the faster it's going to rapid. Even if your CNC could actually move at like 300 inches per minute, it could move that fast by itself. Fusion 360 builds in the limitations, so if that's something that you're actually going to be using for manufacturing for business, they want you to use a license because you're supposed to. I don't have a license because I'm not using this for business. Anything that I'm going to do on the CNC with business goes through different software, so this is just for me, and this is kind of what I end up doing to try and work around or within those limitations. I do the pocket for the top rabbets, so that's the clearance for all those fillets. And then I actually do the deeper pocket. The way I've modeled it up is an exact fit. So the actual fingers on the side pieces are 1/2 inch wide, and the sockets on the other piece for the end is also 1/2 inch. So they fit, but they're really tight. What I ended up doing is you can do what's called stock to leave. So there's radial stock and axial stock. Axial is how deep. Say you're cutting to 1/2 inch, you might want to only cut to 0.4 or 5 inches deep, and then you'll come in with your final bit and actually go out to the bottom, something like that. I'm going all the way down to my final depth because that part is fine, but then I'm using a negative 0.002 radial offset. And so that's going to give me basically negative 0.004 of clearance in those. And I found that works pretty well, especially once you get glue on them. They slide together with a good fit, but not so tight that they're going to end up squeezing all the glue out when you're trying to put it together. One of the things I want to figure out is if I can constrain that. And I haven't figured that out yet because I haven't spent a whole lot of time on it. But what I needed to do is basically I want to take that radial offset and put it here and here. Right now it does both the sides and the back. What that means is this is also a little bit deeper than what I want. And so what I've kind of done to get around that is I've just pushed this down a little bit and gave myself a little lip here. And that's not a bad thing just because it helps hide this joint here from any of these gaps that might be there because of that offset. After that, I move on to the side. So basically do the same thing. I slot the side. This is clearing out that rabbet. I just use the sketch here. I have a square or a rectangle, I mean, that way I can just clear out this whole thing rather than clearing out a bunch of individual pieces. It's actually quicker to just let her get in there and rip all that out. And then I do the same thing on the other side. And then I do the pockets. So these rabbets here are for the clearance for the fillets again. And then I actually clear out in between all of those fingers. And then from there, I cut it out. And I am leaving tabs. So these are manual tabs. They're just located where I want them because I didn't want them on the ends because it's not as easy to clean those up. And I'm only clamping on the top and bottom. So there's really no reason to try to hold this in there. If it gets broken and shoots out, I don't really care. And then I cut out the end. That is essentially how I've got this thing designed up. And one other trick that I have, and that was part of what I was interested in doing with this box, is I've started working on the parametric side of things. I know how to do it and I've done it before. I'm just continuing to exercise that because it's something good. So right now the box length is 13 inches, the box width is 6 inches. So it's 13 inches long, 6 inches wide, and then the depth of the side and stuff is 4 1/4 because the overall box is supposed to be 5 inches tall with the lid. At least that was my interpretation, whatever. So these are parameters that are set. That's under the modify. You can go to change parameters, but I actually use this little thing and say pin to toolbar because I use it a lot when I'm doing this type of stuff at first, when I'm first setting stuff up. So I like to have it there where I can just click on it height, my width, and my length all defined here, as well as my stock thickness. The thing that I like about doing things this way is it lets you reuse the model without having to change a bunch of stuff manually. And if we go into my sketch, you can see here that this FX, that means function. So that's 13 inches long, but it's a function. And what that means, if I double click into it, is we see that it's tied to length. If I go into my parameters again, and I wanted to say, okay, well, I actually want this to be 18 inches long because I want to use it for something else. And maybe instead of 4 1/4, or I guess I changed it to 4.24. Instead of 4 1/4 inches, I want it to be 7 inches tall. So here you can see all I had to do is change my parameters and it updates the model there. And if I get out of that, finish sketch, it has increased its size. And because the end piece is also set up that way, we can see that it is now the right height as well. So again, if I wanted to go in here and say, okay, instead of being 6 inches wide, because 6 inches wide and 7 inches tall looks weird, let's go with, maybe if it's 18, we'll go with 9 inches. So now we've got a 9 by 18 box, and we can see that's been updated. That is kind of the powerful thing about the parametric modeling, is that it allows you to do that sort of a change. And like you saw, all I had to do is change this, and maybe I'm going to use 1/2 inch stock instead of 3/4 inch, so you can see everything gets updated. The depth of this rabbit here gets updated to match that 1/2 inch. The height is updated. Thing is, once you've done that, so I've updated this, now if I go into the manufacturer tab, we can see that I have this original setup, which is not going to work because obviously I can't fit those same parts into what I had before. So obviously my setup doesn't work for that. So what I end up doing is I will copy that. Actually, I usually just do duplicate. So duplicate. So now I'll open that up and I will set this to, let's see, so if we know that we decided it's going to be 13 or 18 by 9, so that's 27 plus my 1/2 inch is 27.5. So let's go and make this 29 inches just to have enough room. And we know that we made it 7 inches tall, so we'll just say 8 inches. And then this is now 0.5 inches thick. And just like that, we have a new setup. You can see how these all have the regenerate on them. And if I were to start clicking through them, you can see these are all set to where things were at before. Obviously isn't quite right. But what I can do is just go in and then say generate, and it'll use the same, I guess, features of the model, for lack of a better term, and it'll regenerate those toolpaths because it knows, hey, I told you to use this contour, so that contour changed, update to do what you're supposed to. And if we just kind of walk through these, we can see that it's updated and it has actually made all of the changes based on those parameters that we updated. That's one of those things that I really like, and it's why I love using Fusion 360 for this kind of thing, just because it makes that really, really easy. All right, so that was kind of the overview of how I'm using the Fusion 360 setup to get this thing programmed into the CNC and do all the toolpaths and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that was interesting and helpful. I've had a lot of fun working through these boxes. Again, this was something that I'm involved with through the Minnesota Woodworkers Guild, the CNC special interest group. And we're making a bunch of these boxes. I've got, I think, 6 of them currently, and I'm not sure if I'm going to end up making any more or not. I might move on to doing some other stuff, but it's been a lot of fun. If you thought this was interesting, let me know, hit the thumbs up, and I certainly appreciate it if you would subscribe. But yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get too far into this on the channel or not. If there's enough people that are interested in all this kind of stuff, maybe I'll share more of what I'm doing around that, just because I do want to try to use it more, just because I have it, and it's a lot of fun, something different to try. So anyway, I appreciate those of you that stuck around this far, and I will catch you in the next one.